All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar arranged by Elisa Videra and Pexip. Today, we will be addressing the security aspect of video conferencing and how it is possible to have a successful and secure yet versatile and scalable video conferencing service. So we have two excellent speakers with us today to talk on this topic, Marius Nilsen from Pexip and Eero Heikkilä from Elisa Videra. And they will introduce themselves in just a minute. My name is Lucas, and I will be your host today. So before I give the floor to our speakers, I would like to go through a couple of practicalities. This webinar will be recorded in order to allow people to watch it later on. If you have colleagues or friends that you think would be interested in this topic, feel free to share the recording with them as well. And we will share the link to the recording in an email after this webinar. Through the commenting field, you are able to ask questions from our keynote speakers. We will reserve a few minutes in the end of this webinar for answering your questions, so make sure you ask them while you have the chance. You can find the chat from the panel on your left-hand side, as this picture shows here. So now, without further ado, I will give the floor to our speakers for today, Marius and Eero. So nice to have you both on board. I'm really looking forward to hearing you share on this topic today. Maybe you could start off by quickly introducing yourselves before jumping into this topic. So, Marius, I will hand it over to you.
Thanks, Lucas. So, my name is Marius Nilsen, and I look after the solution architecture team and sort of work a lot in the product team in Pexip, and have been here since 2007, and really look forward to talking to everyone around security and scalability topics today. Eero.
Hello everyone, my name is Eero Heikkilä and I'm the head of professional services at Elisa Videra. I've been working for Elisa Videra for about 10 years now, and been working with solution architectures and running production systems and so on for the whole duration of my employment at Elisa Videra. Okay, so let's start by covering off the topics that we will discuss in this webinar. So we will take a look at different aspects of security in conferencing environments, including pre-meeting security controls, what kinds of controls you have while you're in a meeting, what you should take into account with a video conferencing service and the platform itself, and then what kind of security aspects you need to take into account with endpoints then. And then we will briefly also touch base on scalability and the different scalability aspects. So what the usual bottlenecks are with conferencing environments, how you can today achieve easy and flexible scalability, and how you can achieve proper redundancy and resilience with conferencing services.
Good stuff. So Eero, sort of before people start their video meetings, and this is sort of the pre-meeting security section, right? So what's sort of the main way of securing virtual meetings as it has been used today?
Yes, so with permanent conference rooms or virtual meeting rooms that you have, like personal conference rooms, you can always use PIN codes, and you should use PIN codes. And this is to block the so-called meeting bombing phenomenon that you have seen recently as well, especially during the pandemic when more and more people have been using conferencing services. You should also change the PIN codes occasionally so that people who you have shared PIN codes with don't accidentally enter your meeting.
But some users, they think it's a little bit too complicated to deal with PIN codes, or maybe they meet with a lot of different people, so they don't really sort of want to have the same meeting room. Then there are other options, right?
Yes, you could use, for example, one-time virtual meeting rooms or conference calls. So those one-time virtual meeting rooms would be available only for the duration of the call, and that would increase the security as well. So you would normally have like a unique meeting ID that is only valid during the time of the meeting, and after the meeting it basically is no longer available or usable. So that's a very good way to block these kinds of security concerns. What you should also do is to ensure that the meeting invitation is only sent to the relevant recipients, and make sure that they don't then redistribute the details. Of course, you cannot control it fully, but make them know that the invitation details are not to be shared forward. You should only share the guest PIN code when you use the PIN codes within the invitation. So never share the host PIN code, because that will give elevated rights for whoever would join the call, including meeting controls. And you should also make sure to use up-to-date software versions with whatever software clients you would use with the calls.
I think one thing that, at least a personal experience, I noticed sort of there was this event in March this year that sort of caused a lot of users to use video meetings for things they maybe weren't used to, and many were excited. So I actually saw one of the prime ministers in Europe that used Pexip for their meetings were so excited that they took a picture of their sort of screen and sort of shared it on Twitter, and that's sort of probably not a good match to the third item here on only sharing the meeting invitation with relevant recipients. So for this
absolutely.
user, they definitely had to just sort of make sure that meeting link wasn't the same for other meetings, because even if you have a PIN code, you don't want to invite someone to actually try to sort of guess the PIN code by knowing exactly where to guess. Even though there are protection mechanisms in place, it's kind of, you want to lower the risk as much as possible.
Yes, there is a lot of responsibility for the end user as well when it comes to meeting security. So it's very important to emphasize this to the end users in any organization, that the end users have the responsibility for the security also. No solution is necessarily secure enough if the end user doesn't act responsibly and use the controls that are available. Sorry.
Exactly. Yeah. So sort of these are some of the things you should think about before starting the meeting. But sort of once you're in the meeting, sort of in a physical meeting room, it's sort of easy to look around and see, okay, who's present. If there is sort of an additional person joining. But how do you deal with these things in a virtual meeting?
Yeah, so basically in a physical room, you see the people who join the room or come into the room. You can close the door, and nobody else will be able to join after that, unless you of course open the door. But in a conference call, you need to make sure that you know how to use the meeting controls. So you have the roster list or the participant list, via which you can see all the participants on the call. You should use the locking functionality. Most modern solutions have the possibility to lock the virtual meeting room for the conference call when everybody has joined. You also have controls for disconnecting, for example, unwanted participants. And I think you should also end the meeting once done. So shut the lights from the physical conference rooms, the room as well, and leave the room when ready. So I think it's essential to keep an eye on the meeting participants. And also very important to remember is that you only should discuss sensitive information in private, not in public places or open office spaces.
It's sometimes easy to forget that you're also leaking to everyone around you. And sort of one of our customers actually told us that in a security analysis they figured out that sort of the main security leak wasn't sort of on the technical parts, but actually the anyone passing by the window could actually see into their meeting rooms. So they sort of put a lot of efforts into super strict encryption, and everyone walking by could actually see the content. So that's sort of a combination of physical and digital, I guess.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, but then Marius, you're representing a technology vendor here. So what would the security conscious customers be asking for when it comes to like backend services?
So especially here in Europe, we do see sort of quite a lot of concerns around the data privacy, specific concerns. Of course, this is relevant all around the world, but in particular, as many cloud providers are sort of US based, there are questions around sort of privacy shield that was recently invalidated, GDPR. Is that actually important for others? How is it dealt with? So what's normally a lot of the sort of larger enterprises are typically asking sort of what kind of data are you collecting and what's actually done with this information, especially in these times with sort of lots of freemium options and a lot of customers having access to sort of free video solutions. They believe that they're not paying for it because maybe they're not paying money, but sort of maybe there is a value in the information in the metadata, right? So what is your conferencing provider or collaboration provider actually doing with that data? And also sort of where is this data stored? And when I say data, I don't necessarily mean the recording of the meeting, because most meetings are not recorded, but the sort of the data around who participated, who are you meeting with. And this is sometimes easy to forget, that if you're talking to other companies, especially if it's sort of stock exchange sensitive information on who you're meeting with, that might sort of be very valuable information for someone. So this is sort of at least for some customers, they need to sort of strongly consider this from the European perspective. In addition, it's been sort of a huge focus, and of course for obvious reasons this year, around sort of how is security handled in the backend. And there I think it's really important, so of course I can speak for Pexip as a conferencing vendor, to really have a culture for both security and test-driven development. Meaning that sort of you can always rush to just add sort of tons of different features, but what's sort of the track record of the cloud vendor that you're looking at with regards to sort of making sure that those features are also secure? And sort of sometimes it's very cool to have fancy hats and all these sort of things, but that might not be the main feature important for sort of enterprise tools. And things will always break. They're for guaranteed. All solutions at some point you will get in trouble, and especially in the world of interoperability, where lots of different systems from Cisco, Polycom, web browsers, Chrome, Firefox, Edge, sort of Skype for Business, Teams, there are sort of constant changes of software versions everywhere, including mobile devices. Things are auto-updating. It's also really important. You mentioned earlier that sort of customers should make sure their software are up to date. That also makes it very challenging to be the vendor where everyone is connecting, because we need to make sure we're always ahead. And then it's super important to have sort of a really test-driven development path with a sort of huge test rig, making sure we always test the next version of stuff. So hopefully we can find the issues before customers experiencing them in real life. And of course, sort of a technology vendor should also sort of hold certifications like ISO and GTEC and other certifications, sort of proving their track record in this space. But sort of for you as delivering sort of lots of services and deliveries to your customers, sort of when you put together an enterprise proposal, what are the sort of main concerns you are considering?
Yes, firstly, enterprises of course seek security quality and availability with the solutions, and it's advisable only to use high-end commercial communication solutions that would have proper security accreditations also on the technology front, as you mentioned in the previous slide already. This way you can rest assured that the security patches and everything are up to date all the time, the features are supported that you seek to have, and so on. And also, naturally, the provider has to have the relevant security certifications and its data centers as well, including ISO 27001 and ISO 9001, for example, for quality. This would ensure and give them the assurance that the organization, its processes, people, and production systems are on a desired state. But then any IT services should today strive to provide services which are encrypted, both at rest to protect the data confidentiality and integrity, and in transit to prevent eavesdropping. So it's not actually a very difficult thing to eavesdrop a real-time communications call if you don't encrypt it. So it's essential to ensure that every single call is encrypted whenever it's possible. There are some countries which would, prohibit that, but the vast majority of countries enable that, and in those countries you can use encryption standards such as AES to encrypt the calls. Then you have other protection mechanisms such as like brute force, for example. Brute force as a term refers to somebody submitting many passwords or PIN codes consecutively in the attempt to find the correct password eventually. And these attacks might be systematic as well, that they would check basically every single password variation or combination and eventually seek to find the correct one. And then for this reason, like a brute force protection mechanism would be essential for like user accounts and virtual meeting rooms or conference calls.
That's something we've seen a lot in the news for the last 6 months that have actually happened with conferencing vendors that didn't have these protections in place, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. And then you should also be protected against phenomena like denial of service, which is something that unfortunately is more and more common every day, and they get more and more complex as well. Spam over internet telephony is a bit like email spam, but it would mean that somebody would actually get a telephone call or a video call. So it often would, disturb the recipient even more than getting like a spam email, because you would actually get the call on your phone or a conferencing device. So protection against those kinds of phenomena would be very, very important, and is considered very important by the enterprises. Then naturally, when it comes to service security, you need to harden those services properly. So you should seek to start as securely as possible, and then you might want to relax the security where it is okay. Of course, the more secure you can have a solution, the better. But any enterprise should have their own set of security protocols in place for any conferencing service. But you can, of course, then loosen up the restrictions a bit as you operate. No employee wants to start like with loose security and then see that it's been actually made stricter afterwards. So it's better to start strict and then relax a bit wherever possible. But of course, you don't need to necessarily even compromise on functionality these days whenever you like deliver secure solutions.
Just set the high bar from the start, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then naturally, when it comes to any like hardware servers or endpoints or other services out there, any IT systems, you need to disable all unnecessary services and protocols from those to mitigate the risk for any potential attacks or leaving any backdoors to your network. You should only allow secure management over secure protocols. You can only allow management from a segregated management network, so your systems cannot actually be managed from any other devices than specified devices. Then it's also very important to use unique user accounts and enforce strict administrative password policies to these, with the need to actually renew your password like every like 60 or 90 days as well. And naturally, for being able to encrypt the calls reliably, you should use valid security certifications or certificates only, both on the public and the private interfaces of those servers. And then last but not least, you should ensure that you have logging covered end to end. So you have audit logs, security logs, and system logs, so that you can see if something happens, you can always find who has done something, what kind of an incident you have had, and so on. So you can trace the whole path essentially, and find out what has happened with something or what is about to happen, and especially if somebody is trying to attack you or something, then it's essential to have these kinds of mechanisms in place.
So it seems like there's a lot.
Also automate this.
Yeah, this seems to be a lot of things to sort of to keep in mind. But I guess this is what you do for a living, right?
Yes. Yeah. Every day.
Good. Okay,
then on service security. So Marius, how do you see is on-prem more secure generally than cloud services? And does it really matter whether you use on-prem or cloud-based services if the calls can be encrypted anyway? So
yeah, so it's kind of easy to see it from this perspective, right? Sort of the video call is encrypted, then sort of now cloud should be just as secure, or there is sort of an inherent feeling that sort of on-prem is more secure. I would actually recommend customers to download sort of a white paper we have on pexip.com around sort of the Pexip's responses to sort of 14 cloud security best practices from the UK National Security Centre, which sort of covers this in detail, because it's actually quite interesting to read some of their recommendations, saying that you shouldn't necessarily operate something if you're not the expert at doing it, unless you have to. So sort of, yes, things that stay on your network, it's more local, but assuming that someone has this as sort of one out of 50 other tasks, they cannot necessarily sort of keep up to date, etc. So we put together this this table where sort of most customers would normally start as high as possible, and depending on their requirements, they would sort of go deeper into the stack. So the three questions they would normally ask themselves is sort of, who is sort of administering the service, who is sort of managing it, and where is sort of the data and the solution hosted. So the first one would be sort of on a public shared cloud service, and sort of we have those services available. This is sort of for most customers, this is an excellent fit, where the customer is sort of managing and changing codes and provisioning users, and the vendor or service provider is managing and hosting it. Some customers, though, they do want to have sort of a private cloud service. They don't bother about sort of the hosting of the data, but they do want a private solution just for them, not shared with other customers. And then going sort of one step deeper, the customer may want to host it, but having a partner or service provider actually managing it for them. And then you sort of have the customers that sort of have the strictest regulations and the deepest desire for control, both of the meeting content and the metadata in the call. And that would be sort of a dedicated deployment inside of the customer's network, completely managed by the customer, and they would just sort of ask when they have support questions. So here, sort of normally, it depends on your requirements, and that's always good to discuss per customer. It's not like there is one answer that's best for all, but the recommendations in general were actually to rather consider what do you need to do yourself to meet the regulations and the security requirements that you have. So that's a little bit on the service side. So we talked about pre-meeting, in-meeting, sort of the requirements and the services. But most customers do have quite a bit of appliances they're using here, right? And I guess this is also something that you deal with every day. What are sort of the main sort of security requirements there? Because sometimes it could be easy to forget to keep those in mind, as maybe they're not always managed by IT. Sometimes it might be managed by facilities that does not necessarily have that as a day-to-day job to consider.
Yeah, I agree. So the security controls for the endpoints include authentication, of course, against the register systems for the protocols that you would use for real-time communication, such as SIP or HTTP3. You should basically never use default passwords, and one very important thing is to only allow the administrators to manage the devices. We actually, as a provider, very often, tell our customers that we would be the only ones managing those, because we have seen cases where the customer, like end users, have started mangling with the settings, and then nobody is after that.
Wi-Fi sharing and some features that seemed cool, but someone outside the window could start use the system, right?
Indeed, and they might change the layouts and things like those. So the settings after that are not consistent within the endpoint fleet, and that causes confusion within the customer, but might also introduce security concerns as well. Also with the endpoints, it's very important to encrypt the call signaling. With for example, SIP, we would use SIP TLS, and with the call media meaning audio, video, and content payload for the call. So both should be encrypted where applicable and where possible. And also with these, just like with the server side of things, you should only allow management from designated management hosts. So you have specific management servers that you can access these devices from remotely and be able to manage them. And you should have a provider that provides a capability for centrally provisioning the devices to ensure that you have consistent settings. This is not only for hardening of the security side of the endpoints, but also ensuring that the end user experience is always consistent. And very important to make sure that the device is actually up to date with the latest software versions. And you shouldn't use devices that are end of support by the vendors. We see those occasionally still with our customers, and they are generally a security risk and not only a security risk, but also an interoperability risk. So the devices might stop working someday, or they might leave a backdoor for anybody to attack your enterprise network if you use a device that is not doesn't anymore get the most recent security patches and things like those.
Yeah.
So
I think that this sums up sort of a lot of the security concerns. So without sort of going deeply into the details of everything around scalability, I guess you've been working in a lot of sort of Fortune 500 and large scale environments, right? So
yes,
just sort of the key bottlenecks that customers meet and need to consider. What are those?
Yeah. So with conferencing environments, you need to take into account many things when you design for scalability. Network bandwidth is one, firewall throughput is one, hardware server performance being one, Then you might have gateway servers with transcoding capacity, application server capacity, and license capacity, which might become the bottleneck. But you need to think about all of these when designing.
One that speaks to me a lot is sort of the hardware server performance, because in the past, I believe everyone was sort of buying these 20 to 40 port MCUs that cost sort of hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they scaled to 20 or 40 ports for most of them. Then that was the limit. But sort of in this world with sort of lots of people attending from PCs and not only conference rooms, how do you build scalability when you deploy enterprise solutions today?
Yeah, so you can use modern technologies support virtualization, of course, which enables spinning up additional capacity within hours. So previously you had to actually source those servers and logistics and everything, deliveries would take a lot of time. But today with virtualization, you can enable additional capacity within hours, of course within the physical boundaries of the infra. And then this also adds an additional layer of resilience. And if you need to scale it up, outside of the physical boundaries of the infra, you would then need to add standard hardware servers for additional capacity. But then you can also support cloud environments, and you can run conferencing workloads on cloud service provider platforms too, such as Amazon Web Services, Azure, or Google Cloud Platform. And with these, you have tens of locations available globally. And what is the nicest thing with these is that you actually have a pay-as-you-go model with them, so you don't need to make upfront investments when you scale up your service. And you can have these working alongside your data centers too, as like cloud bursting resources, for example. So these would automatically be spun up upon the need, and you will be billed only per the use. So if you don't use these cloud bursting resources, you're not billed at all for them. And they can be used, for example, to support the utilization peaks without investments on hardware resources.
And I think this is sort of quite interesting. You mentioned with virtualization, you can scale up in hours instead of months, and with cloud environments. And I believe sort of you've probably for your services as well scaled up quite a bit this year by using cloud compute. And I recently just sort of attended a demo from our development team, where they are now taking the ambition down from just spending a few hours of creating VMs to literally just changing from 50 ports to 200 ports, and within 5 minutes all the automation in the background was done. And that's pretty amazing, given sort of some years ago we were sort of do we want 40 ports, or if we need something more, we need to dramatically change. So it's a very different world than it used to be.
It is definitely. So during like March, April timeframe with the pandemic, getting more and more severe, we also had to, or we saw a sudden surge in the capacity utilization as well in our services. So with the modern technologies, we were able to scale up our service, in a matter of days, rather than spending lots and lots of money, lots and lots of time to scale it up. So we could essentially, take cloud bursting resources and also add virtualization resources to support the increased utilization.
Exactly. So the last slide we have is around redundancy and resilience, and sort of historically for a lot of customers, PSTN and sort of voice meetings, that was sort of in the mission critical path, but video isn't really nice to have anymore, and that puts some requirements on you and us for that matter when building these solutions. So how do you deal with this?
Yeah, so as you said, real-time communication solutions are a business-critical tool for many enterprises today. But generally, the licensing of modern technologies allows for distributed architectures. So we can set up both local and geographical redundancy. and it's also highly recommended for any like enterprise customers. We can do it without like lots and lots of money essentially, and we can use the likes of virtualization and cloud platforms also to enable that.
Because in the past you had to buy two of everything.
Yes, absolutely. And I would say that as a principle, it's always good to dimension a service with enough capacity to cater for unlikely but possible data center outages. So it might always happen that a data center goes down, for example, or the relevant resources in a specific data center for some reason fail. So today it doesn't require that much like extra money to cater for that kind of a scenario. So I would warmly recommend to be prepared for something like that.
Yeah.
And you can of course have as many layers of resilience and should have as possible.
Depending on what you need, right? I see Lucas is back, so I guess that means we're getting to the end of the presentation. Lucas, did we have any questions that came in during the session?
Yes, we did. So thank you so much, first and foremost, for the presentations. Really interesting. I learned a lot of new things here, and as you said, we're starting to kind of wrap this webinar up. I think we're running a bit out of time, as we tend to do when the conversation is good. But let's still take a couple of minutes for answering these. We have at least two questions that had come in. So maybe Marius, if you want to take the first one, I think this is tailor-made for you. How do you ensure encryption with so many different solutions and systems talking different languages?
Yeah, that's actually a good point. And even sort of the most modern video endpoints may support like AES 256-bit encryption, others AES 128-bit, and lots of different systems using different protocols. So this is actually done by the encryption being done from the client to the server. There it's being decrypted, translated into the right format, and always using the strongest possible encryption. But what you need to keep in mind is, since the server is handling the data, both the call detail records and the media, you do need to trust whoever is handling your conferencing solution. And there is a lot of confusion out in the market on this, but essentially sort of back to the table where should you run it yourself, should you put it in a shared cloud service, a dedicated cloud service, you need to consider who is operating this for you, and you need to vet that vendor as sort of if it was actually sitting on all that data, and consider your requirements. So the technology is there. It's more for the customer to consider what's important for them.
All right, and then Eero, I think this next one is for you. And so how do you balance security, privacy, and usability?
Yes. So, for example, any of the topics we discussed in this webinar, that they wouldn't require you to compromise on features. So generally you can harden the services very well and take lots and lots of security controls into the solution without compromising on functionality or usability necessarily. But when it comes to, for example, the use of personal conference rooms or virtual meeting rooms, as we call them, if you're reluctant to take PIN codes in the use, you can of course make use of like one-time virtual meeting rooms or conference rooms, which wouldn't necessarily need the PIN codes. But you can of course add like a calendar integration to that. If you use a physical room system and you invite the physical room system into the meeting, the physical room system could join the meeting with the single click of a button essentially. But yes, of course, the situations might be different with different kinds of customers. For example, with highly secure governmental customers, that they might have to take all kinds of security controls into into use, but with most organizations, most enterprises out there, you can actually achieve a very good level of security without compromising usability or functionality.
Okay. Thank you so much for answering those questions. I hope those answers were sufficient. So maybe a couple of words here last about what will happen next. So first and foremost, remember to sign up for our next and final webinar in this series. Next week on Wednesday, we're going to talk about how delivering and deploying a service on a global scale requires knowledge, experience, and unique skills. So make sure you do not miss that one. I think it's going to be super great. So we will share all necessary information in an email after this webinar, including the link to the recording of this webinar, information about the next webinar with a link to the registration form, and a summary of this webinar with the top tips from our keynote speakers here today on what to consider in order to have a safe and scalable video conferencing system. So gentlemen, thank you so much for the great presentations. A big thank you to our audience for tuning in, and have a great day, keep safe, and meet video. Thank you.